pleasure to be here, and it was fascinating to hear Shoma and the others talk about education and how to create cutting-edge schools. And I think for those of you in the field of education and are still here, some bit of what I'm going to talk will be very, very relevant for you as well, because I think the one thing that we don't discuss often is how are our cities going to be more livable? How are we going to make mobility an important and integral part of living and an integral part of our cities? I'm going to just request for the slides to come on and just request all of you to bear with us for a moment before we get started. How many of you in this room has ever used an Uber? Okay, so some hands up, but not very many, but we're going to talk about how we believe ride-sharing services like Uber are transforming transportation and mobility, not just in India, but worldwide, and the kind of impact that they're having on a socio-economic basis in terms of cutting congestion, cutting pollution, and making sure that we're actually taking more cars off the road instead of adding cars on the road. And I know that sounds strange coming from Uber, that how we're talking about cars being a part of the solution for cutting congestion and pollution, but that's exactly what I'm here to present. All right, so as we said, the future of urban mobility. I'm here to really present to you all how we can look at cutting congestion, pollution, as well as parking using the cars that we have on the road today. That's right, you heard it correct. How do you cut congestion and pollution using cars that you have on the road today? And of course, using the technology that all of you have in your pockets, the smartphones that you're all carrying today. It's very easy for us to demonize the car when we talk about issues like pollution and congestion. Of course, there are 2 billion of them in the world. But let's talk about our own city, Delhi here. In Delhi alone, we've seen the number of cars actually double up in the last decade. Those are staggering numbers, and that's exactly what we believe is the problem. But here's what. That's not the problem. The problem is how we use the cars. And the answer to that is individually. Next time you're at a traffic light, just look to your left or right, and you will see that most often than not, there is only one person in the car. And that's how we like to use our cars, because we believe if we drive alone, we're in good company. Of course, all this individual car use is coming at a huge cost, a huge public cost. Look at cities like Bangalore, for instance, where we're seeing crazy congestion levels, where it takes almost 2 hours for anybody to commute to work or back home. But sadly, this is just 4% of the problem. And that's the data that we want to present to all of you, that cars are sitting idle 96% of the time. As a result, nearly a fifth of the land in some cities is being used only to store these hunks of steel. Remember, this land can go towards building some fantastic schools, as we were discussing some while ago, even affordable housing, or perhaps parks that our children need. But no, we use them as parking lots because we want to store these hunks of steel, and we believe everybody should own a car. Let me now look into how people are being pushed into buying cars, pushed into private car ownership. This is a city familiar to most people. It's New York. And even in a city which has a great public transit, like New York, the subway doesn't get you to your door. That's why 2.7 million cars drive into Manhattan every day. Not a pretty number, clearly, because this shows that car ownership is a necessity. It's not a luxury. Let's talk about how we as a company, how Uber hopes to change that. So when Uber began, it started all on a snowy night in Paris when our founders, Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp, couldn't get a ride home. And they thought, how wonderful would it be if we could just push a button and get a ride? And that's how the idea began. Just a few months later, they set up Uber, and you could do exactly that. Push a button and get a ride. But while that was the idea of starting Uber, what the company soon realized as it started growing very fast, that transportation is hugely inefficient around the world. It doesn't matter whether you're in a developed country, whether it's the Western world or it's the third world, transportation continues to be inefficient. But now the other good news is that ride-sharing services like Uber have discovered that there is an alternative to a world that looks like a parking lot and it moves like a traffic jam. It's a world where people can actually share rides and where they can even be encouraged to take public transport. The question is, how do we get there? Well, the answer lies in providing affordable, reliable alternatives to individual car ownership. Let's first start with reliability and convenience, because those are two important parameters. Why will you decide to not go ahead and buy a car if you have an option of reliable and convenient mobility? Look at this map. This is Mumbai, and Uber has proven that ride-sharing can reliably serve every corner of a city like Mumbai, including parts where other means of transportation just cannot reach. And you can just push a button, and the average time for you to get a ride is definitely under 10 minutes. So it doesn't matter which part of the world you're in or where you're going. You can always get there as long as you have the service. If you live, for instance, in New York's outer boroughs, you're as likely to get picked up as you are in downtown Manhattan. And that's an important point that we want to make here, how technology is a great leveler. It doesn't matter where you're going, it doesn't matter where you live, but technology can actually help create that equalizing balance in society, and that's the socioeconomic impact that we're talking about. In fact, what we're going to now show you is the city of Delhi, where you're seeing the same impact coming on over the years. We'll just try and load that slide. But essentially, what we're seeing is how coverage of public transportation is increasing, simply because not only are we complementing public transport, but we're also being able to provide more people, encouraging more people to move on. Let's now try, and if we're not able to load that slide, let's go on to London, where you know that if your train or subway or bus doesn't get you all the way home, Uber will help you take that last mile. What we do is we complement existing mass transit systems, and we're able to extend the reach of, say, the tube in London without any extra cost to the taxpayer or to the government. Nearly 30% of all Uber rides in London end within 200 meters of a tube or a train station. And what does this data actually tell you? That we're actually helping people use public transit. Let's move on to now talk about how we can resolve the issue of affordability, because it's all very well to say you need reliable transportation, you need convenient transportation, but what about making it affordable? Because remember, nobody is going to stop buying cars unless they feel there's a more reliable, convenient, as well as affordable alternate to transportation. Let me now say how policymakers have been trying to encourage carpooling for many, many years. There are many educationists in this room. If you look at Dr. Mahesh Prasad at Step by Step, there was Manith here from Heritage School. I think the value that most of the educationists want to inculcate in students as well as parents today is please carpool. Please make sure that you're getting more people into fewer cars, because that helps cut down congestion. And I know it's almost a rule in some of the schools that if there are children coming from the same area, they're encouraged to carpool. But how do you do it in a school-like system? It's actually good value-oriented schools like Step by Step, like Heritage, who actually match the parents. And they say, you know what, you live in the same area, how about you carpooling? And encourage them to carpool to school. But that can that be scaled up? Probably not. It can be done at a level where there is intent, but how do you scale it up? Well, we have the answer. Technology can help scale it up. And this is a graphic which we want you to look carefully, because if you look at it, initially what you saw were two lines. That's person A and person B traveling in exactly the same direction, but there are two rides that are taking you there, two separate rides. But what we are saying is, make it look like this. Combine the two lines and make sure those two people are sharing their rides and not taking out two different cars or ordering two different rides to go in the same direction. And that's how the idea of Uber Pool came about, which has become a stupendous success for us around the world. It's because it's made people realize that carpooling can only take off if you add technology to it. And this breakthrough that our engineers noticed about a lot of duplicate rides allowed us to combine two people who are going to the exact same place at the exact same time and use mobile technology to conveniently match up these people. Well, why does this matter and why is it good? It's good for passengers because a shared ride, remember, is cheaper. And that's what people are realizing. They're paying a much lower cost for a shared ride than they would for a regular ride. Well, why is it good for drivers? Because they have more time with paying passengers in the back of the car, so they literally earn more. It's good for cities because, as we said, more people in fewer cars is always good for a city that's trying to resolve issues of congestion and pollution. And surely, policymakers in cities like Delhi and Bangalore need to wake up to these realities of going ahead with some big, bold bets to resolve some of these problems. Let's look at this. Let's look at how Uber Pool is actually resolving some of these issues. We're helping actually make sure that we're reducing the number of miles that are driven. So what you can see on your screen is 312 million. That is the number of miles we have been able to reduce in 1 year alone, 2016, by getting people to carpool. That's more than the distance between the Earth and Mars. So remember, that's the kind of scalable impact Uber Pool can have. Even in cities like New Delhi, people are embracing carpooling like never before. We've got nearly 20% of the trips on most cities where we have the facility now on Uber Pool. For cities like New Delhi, that number is a fascinating 30%. Nearly 30% of our rides today are pool rides. Let's look at how we're getting more people in fewer cars is also helping us save fuel. Remember, it's a scarce commodity, and we all need to do our bit to save fuel. We've managed to save 6.2 million gallons of fuel, which is enough to fill over 9 Olympic swimming pools, by just getting more people into fewer cars, by encouraging people to carpool. It's also helped cut carbon emissions by 55,000 metric tons. Those are numbers that all climate change activists and people who are working in this area need to take note of. Those are impressive numbers of how we've helped resolve the problem to a large extent. And remember, we're just getting started. Today, ride-sharing accounts for under 4% of the miles driven globally, just under 4%. But JP Morgan is estimating that the number will rise to more than 25% by 2030. Just imagine the possibilities that lie ahead. I want you to just look at the next slide and give it a thought about what we want our future to be, how we want our cities to look. Our ultimate hope for the future is that we can turn every journey into a shared journey by using a combination of ride-sharing and mass transit, and that people will say, we don't need to own a private car anymore. People will say that we'd rather use these services not through coercion, but by making the right choices, encouraging people to make the right choices. Because A, sharing is cheaper, B, it's a more convenient alternative to individual car ownership. Mass urbanization is one of the defining trends of our generation. There's so much that's great about living in a city today, but unless we embrace shared modes of transportation, we cannot make our cities less congested and less polluted. We need to create more space for parks and for schools, where everyone, wherever they live and whatever their income is, has access to affordable as well as reliable transportation.